Everybody and welcome to the channel. Today's video addresses student concerns or questions relating to the coursework component of our course, specifically how to begin or approach screenplay writing. The video will cover screenplay layouts, some basic tips to get you started, and a brief overview of just some narrative structural approaches you may wish to adopt. And the video addresses content for the WJEC Film Studies A-Level course as of 2020. Now, some of the points I'll talk about in this video, I'll just sort of quickly go over them. But if you want more information or an extended explanation of anything, click on the links in the description box below. That'll take you to our website. And that is a good time to remind you of our website. I run a film studies website that contains lessons and PowerPoints and resources and video lessons and essay plans for the WJEC A-Level course. So if you're interested or want more support, or if you want more help with what I'm going to talk about in this video, visit the link on screen now. Okay, so the master screen layout is what you're working towards, and the format and the layout is very important, and your screenplay must conform to what is known as the master script layout. This is an industry-wide format used by screenwriters across the world. So if you want to be a screenwriter, this is the format that you will be using when you submit your work to producers, and producers would expect this format, and hopefully that'll become clear why that is as I run through the format in this video. Okay, so on the left hand side of the screen is a bullet pointed list of what the criteria is for the master script format, and I'm just going to run through some of those and show you on the right hand side of the screen how to use that, or how to format your work correctly. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is set our font to Courier. Oops, deleted the entire word. Courier, and then you change that to size 12. So all screenplay work must be submitted in Courier size 12. Now I suggest you do that through the entire process, but just make sure that the final draft of your screenplay is submitted in that font. If you prefer to use another font, please be aware that there will be penalties applied and you will lose marks. It's a simple request and it's literally no excuse not to do it. Okay, the next thing you need to do is when you have written more than one page, you add numbers to the top right hand side of the page and you add them sequentially. So of 1, 2, 3 onwards, quite straightforward, but get in the habit of manually entering them. And also just be aware that as you go back and edit your screenplay, let's say we had some lines here, the number 2 on the next page is probably going to be moved down. So just be aware of that, and it's probably best to just save that until the very end. Actually, when you are doing a final draft, you can add the page numbers, very straightforward. Okay, after that we have a single column with a wide margin. So as you can see now, it's a pretty standard layout on the right hand side, but what the master screen requires is a wider margin and a narrower column in the center. So you can go to layout and you can select wide, and as you can see, the work is centered in the middle of the page and it looks a little bit more like a professional screenplay. Okay, what else? We need a slug line. Okay, the slug line is very important, and what that is, it's used to contextualize the scene and provide a bit of context for not only the performers but the filmmakers on set and for pre-production. So the slug line is this at the top, and it should have a number, so all scenes should be numbered sequentially. So you've got your page number at the top, but then you have scene number. So scene number 1 goes there and at the end of the sentence as well. And in the slug line you should include an indication of where action is taking place, so that is either inside a building or outside, so it's interior or exterior, and that can be written INT or EXT in bold letters. Next to that you have the location, so this could be a more specific or a slightly more specific explanation of where the scene takes place. So on our example, exterior, it's outside, and it's on a cornfield near sunset, and then the number 1 at the end as well. So to repeat, for the slug line, you need the location as in the interior, exterior, a location descriptor, and you can also add a lighting descriptor to indicate what time of day the scene takes place at. So we're going to add day, and there you go. That is how you write your slug line. Okay, moving on from the slug line, we have dialogue. So dialogue, if we look down here, should be centered. Alright, so we don't want it on the right or the left. It's got to be centered in the middle of the page. And you should also have the person's name in uppercase as well. Okay, so there's some basic pointers on format, and I'll leave this on screen for a second so you can look at the list and get a better understanding of what a finished or correctly formatted master screen layout will look like. Next part of the video, I'm just going to look at some general tips. Now, I'll point out these are just sort of stream of consciousness off the top of my head. I'll include some links in the description below, but these tips are designed to give you some ideas on how to approach the screenwriting, the best ways to write dialogue, and also narrative structures and different types of narratives and layout. So I'm just going to talk through a few things, and I'll put a few links on screen in the description for you to follow along. Okay, so my first tip would be read existing screenplays. There are many screenplays listed on our college website, and I provided examples of real, produced films, Hollywood produced films, but also we have screenplays for short films, but also existing student work. And what you need to do is familiarize yourself with not only the layout, but the mode of writing. It's a very unusual and distinct type of writing. Because your characters basically have to talk and sound natural, but at the same time to develop and plot and describe an environment. It's very tricky. So what you need to do, and my first tip, is to read as many screenplays or screenplay extracts as you can. And for example, if you are writing an opening sequence for the brief, to introduce a character or something like that, it's a good idea to read those sections of existing screenplays. And write what you know. I'd say it's important to write from a place of confidence and that your work feels genuine. Okay, so a way to develop this is by writing from a personal experience and or writing within a genre or style that you're familiar with. You should not be trying to reinvent the wheel. You want to be creative, yes, because it is a creative project and the creative component is assessed. However, at the same time, your work must conform to narrative and genre expectation. And I think a lot of the time students struggle because they put up a barrier thinking, they've got to do something exceptional or break the mold. Where if you just look at the films Hollywood puts out, throughout its history, but in particular the last 10 years, genre and narrative are king again. So make sure you conform to expectations and try and work within an existing narrative. Show, don't tell. So show, don't tell is a writing technique in which story and characters are related through sensory detail and action rather than exposition. So what you want to avoid is a large chunk of text describing what's happening or telling the audience what's happening, and you don't want the characters to just describe what is happening around them. Real people don't talk like that in real life. They react to it and don't describe it. So this show, don't tell fosters a style of writing that's more immersive for the reader, and it allows the spectator to be immersed in the narrative and it positions us closer to the characters. And if you want more information on show, don't tell, you can email me and ask for support. I can send you some chapters to look at, but have a look on our website. There's some more information there. But it's best summed up by a quote by a Russian playwright called Anton Chekhov, and he famously says about screenwriting or writing of theatre. He said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass." So in short, showing illustrates while telling merely states. I'm going to put on screen two quick examples of showing versus telling. Okay, if we tell an event, it would say Michael was terribly afraid of the dark. It's very concise, it's very short, and it tells us everything we need to know. However, think about that on screen. If a character just says that, where do you go from there? It's very dull and basic and doesn't really tell us much. But if you want to show that, you could do something like this. As his mother switched off the light and left the room, Michael tensed. He huddled under the covers, gripped the sheet, and held his breath as the wind brushed past the curtain. So hopefully you can see the difference between showing and telling. And again, this is just down to you to develop your own strategy and your own approach and method for writing. And also remember, you're going to write many drafts of this. So if you're stuck on your first draft or you're not quite sure how to show something, write down the telling aspect. And in my feedback, I can help you develop that so it's a bit more cinematic. Okay, next tip, creating a sense of setting. One of the best ways to show rather than tell is to create a sense of setting. You can do this by writing about how characters perceive and interact with their surroundings, weaving plenty of sensory detail and occasionally action into the scene. You should avoid straight description. You do not want to start a scene with a huge block of text overly describing scenes. Descriptions of environments should be short, concise, and contain information relevant to the scene or the plot. You should then build a sense of environment through dialogue, the way the characters interact with each other and how the characters interact within the scenes. Okay, so if you think about the start of Blade Runner, you could just describe a neon city at night. It's packed, it's rammed, there's loads of people, there's a lot of noise, and you could just describe it. Or you could tell that experience from the point of view of Deckard as he walks through the streets. People bump into him. You know, there's a toxic smell in the air. The noise is overwhelming. He's getting drenched as he walks past, people on the street. Think about ways you can describe through character action, basically. To build on that, use dialogue to show characters. Okay, so one of the main issues students run into is dialogue and how to write realistic characters. Think about how you interact with your friends and how you speak to each other. It's very different from how you speak to me, I imagine, and how you speak to people in positions of authority. So you have to have all your characters differentiated. They should speak like real people, but they should all have different, unique personalities. Describe action. Use strong details, but don't overdo it. Okay, so there will be descriptive elements in your screenplay, obviously, but you should try to avoid overly detailed description and instead convey the information via character action. So, for example, he was late. St. Mark's clock tower had struck 1 and Enzo found himself pushing against the tide of tourists milling towards the cities lining the Piazza San Marco. A clump of pigeons scattered in front of him. So obviously, you're talking about character action, but also describing the environment at the same time. Okay, the next tip is try and avoid loose threads. If you're writing a novel, or you're writing a book, or even a stage play, you can have loose threads where that are not resolved. It may be character development, it may be bringing, what you call colour to the world. But in cinema, everything has to be in service to the narrative. There's just no getting around it. Everything must connect to another element in the screenplay. There's no wasted dialogue, and everything matters and should contribute to narrative development. So when you're writing, just think, is this developing the narrative? Is this serving the narrative? And is it building character? If the answer is no, then you need to scrap it. Structure is something that I've been asked about, so I'm going to run through 4 or 5 of the most prominent structural approaches to screenwriting. The first structure to consider is whether your film is going to be linear and non-linear. Are you going to offer a classical linear narrative or test your knowledge of narrative by opting for the non-linear approach that's adopted by films like Pulp Fiction and adaptation? Again, lots of information available online about that, and if you've got more information, please let me know. 3-act structure, so generally a linear narrative, a very basic 3-act structure as a begin, middle and an end. And if you want that in a bit more of an academic sense or in terms of how plot is developed, you introduce your characters like you have an established equilibrium, and then you produce what's called an inciting incident or a call to action, and then that sets the characters on a journey which ultimately builds and builds and builds, and that builds and that second event that helps build the conflict or the problem is called rising action, and that ultimately leads to the climax and the resolution of the film. Okay, so it's a very basic 3-act structure, and you could follow that as a rough outline for your structure. You could offer a real-time narrative, so films like 12 Angry Men or High Noon, where the events effectively take place in real time. There are no breaks, jumps, or narrative ellipses. These leave no room for wasted speech or actions. Every single thing that happens should be in service to the narrative. So that's true of all screenwriting, but more so of real time. Multiple timelines. Okay, so this is multiple timelines, and you'd put this together through what you'd call parallel editing, or a parallel narrative. So think of films like The Godfather 2, Cloud Atlas. There are 2 separate narrative threads, and they take place in different time periods and different time zones and different locations, but they're edited together and connected. Next up, we have what is called a fabula or sujet structure. So it sounds quite fancy, and it originates in Russia, but you will be familiar with it. It's a term used to describe a specific mode of narrative construction. It's often utilised in Hollywood cinema and involves showing the ending of the film first, and then having the audience take the journey of how characters got to that point. So obviously it fits crime films and whodunits, maybe historical biographies or historical films. But the story in these films is about the journey and how events transpire, not what transpires. So if you're looking for examples, they're Goodfellas, Citizen Kane, Forrest Gump, Interview with a Vampire, American Beauty, Casino, Fight Club, Wolf of Wall Street. They're all examples of what you call a fabula or sujet narrative structure. Okay, the penultimate structure I'll talk about is called a Rashomon structure. Now, this is named after Akira Kurosawa's 1950 masterpiece of the same name, and it tells a single story from several points of view. So through the use of flashbacks and narration, a filmmaker can present different accounts of a single event, leaving it up to the audience to find the truth. If you want another example, this is available on Netflix, I believe. It's Hero, Yang Yamao's 2001 martial arts film that uses colour and the Rashomon structure to depict one set of events from 4 perspectives. And finally is a circular narrative. A circular narrative can be found in films like Back to the Future, Looper and 12 Monkeys. And basically most films that deal with time travel will adopt this. And this is the narrative begins and ends at the same point. Okay, so the mode borrows heavily from the fabula approach, as in it shows one event, and then the character goes on a journey that ultimately leads back to that event. Now, so as I said, that's just an overview of screenwriting, a few different approaches. If you want me to expand upon anything within this video or clarify anything, please put a comment or send me an email, and I'm happy to make further videos or resources to help you with that. Okay.